On Thursday morning, Becca couldn't bear to go out and couldn't bear to stay in. So she went down to check on Camille, who was 91 and lived in a small, enchanted apartment on the second floor, filled with memorabilia from her famed proto-feminist theater troupe, The Ironed Curtain, still hanging on by a thread, Camille liked to say. Camille, honey, are you managing okay? Would you like some company? Becca could see her editing her reply, forming the first words of the day took effort now. You have a scared face, she said, seeing right through Becca as usual. I think perhaps it is I who should be asking you how you're managing. Mindy says the reporters are sniffing around again. I don't know what more they want me to tell them. Mindy is a warrior, Camille said. She is no doubt beating them off with mops and brooms, as befits the super's wife. Do you mind if we just sit for a while? I wish we could listen to an opera together. My records crackle. That's my favorite thing about them. I have an idea, Camille said. Go in the bedroom, and somewhere under the bed you will find what was the name for those enormous tape players? And Camille, who could barely walk and whose hands trembled and dropped teaspoons, put an invisible one on her shoulder and briefly became a head-bobbing street kid. Boombox, said Becca. Ghetto blaster. Camille, I hope I'm half as together as you if I make it to your age. Ah, well, sometimes I'd rather grow fuzzy and remote. I believe the ghetto blaster can run on batteries, which I should have somewhere on the sideboard. And I have cassette tapes, the sweet vindication of the pack rat. Becca got the player in working order, pulled Così fan tutte from a crooked stack, and kissed the top of Camille's head, her dry white hair such a thin cover for her scalp, and her skull such a hard shell for the wonders that swirled inside. Thank you, Camille. I don't know what I would do without you. Well then, we shall rehearse, because I feel logy this morning, and I'm likely to doze off before the end of the overture. You will hardly miss me. Just tiptoe out when you're ready and leave me to dream of silly young lovers in Napoli. Tanisa will be here before too long to prepare my lunch. So they sat and listened, surrounded by the old familiar posters, the Hirschfeld caricature, the dusty puppets. Becca scanned the bookshelves and let herself fall headlong back into the promise of the previous century. Marianne Moore, Langston Hughes, Erich Fromm, Bruno Bettelheim, Stella Adler. And then her eye landed on Camille's own slim volume, Stage Flight, her perfect little book. One part memoir, one part advice to young theater artists, a copy kept on every actor's shelf beside the Stanislavski and the Uta Hagen. The famous cover with the black and white photo of a sparrow on a bare stage about to take wing from its taped mark. Becca had devoured it, lived by it, even before she knew Camille. She was in high school at music and art then, and her life wouldn't stop unraveling. First the divorce, then her mother's remarriage and move to Mamaroneck, Becca's insistence on staying behind with her father, followed by his sudden death. Somehow she managed to stay on alone in the apartment. It was the 70s, and 17-year-olds were the last thing on anyone's mind. One day she came home from school and saw movers climbing the stoop carrying marionettes and puppets and posters. And though she'd never been a believer, she was convinced the universe regretted what it had done and was offering up Camille as a consolation prize. Becca's own copy of Stage Flight was upstairs, signed by Camille with her soaring, slanted Fs. Fly, dear Becca, fly. She hadn't thought about it in years. Now she pulled the book off the shelf and turned to the back leaf, photo by Otto Warachowski, showing Camille in her prime, hair already streaked with white in a dancer's bun, her long, severely angled face softened by the good joke Otto seemed to have caught her in the middle of telling. While Mozart's lovers made a mess of things and Camille dozed, Becca read about the birth of the marionettes. Camille and Otto had made the first two on a dare when they were newlyweds with no money. They were living in a rented carriage house upstate, waiting out the blacklist. They had bought out the ends of 6 bolts of fabric, broadcloth and velvet and brocade, from a yard goods store going out of business, as well as its entire collection of trimmings. They set these on a table in the hallway between the two rooms. The house was owned by a tinkerer, so they also set up a pile of tools to share. An old staple gun, industrial-sized Elmer's glue, nails and screws, planks and pegs, wires, string, a jigsaw, sandpaper, and a rasp. It might have been the happiest month of my life, Becca read, and I have been blessed with much happiness after a rather unpromising start. We made it all up as we went along, sharing our materials and our trials, humming arias as we worked. We made a vow not to emerge until each of our marionettes was finished. Only we used the word alive. My marvelous Otto. It was like living with Geppetto of the Hudson Valley. On Saturdays, for blue laws were still in effect and everything was shut tight on Sundays, we rested our fingers and we explored. It turned out the Hudson Valley was a perfect home base for the study of our new land. We learned our history, the great, the silly, and the obscure, until we felt American, right down to our Ichabod Crane and our nothing to fear but fear itself. Camille shifted in her sleep, and Becca checked to be sure her skinny chest was rising and falling inside her white blouse. She closed the book and got up. She needed to walk Carney. She needed to face the reporters, needed to visit the shrines that had sprung up all around the square, needed to poach the chicken in the freezer before it went bad, needed to fix her resume. But the book opened obligingly to the page where she'd left off, and she read on, though she knew the stories well. Our respective labor pains were severe, wrote Camille, but Otto gave birth to Doña Quixota, who tilted at grist mills with a rolling pin. And I was proud mother of Pinocchio, whose nose grew longer when she told more truth than her listeners were ready to hear. Together we made her a small desk with a secretary chair that swiveled, and we gave her a boss named Mr. Muleton with the face of a donkey. No one had ever set a marionette show in an office before. The woman at the agency hadn't laughed at Becca's resume. No, she was too decorous for that. But she had taken out a red flare and made X's and arrows and many notes. It was just the first of 1,000 hoops Becca would have to jump through to get anywhere near a regular paycheck. But first she turned to her favorite chapter, the one in which Camille talked about the theater sketches they had named amusements, what would now be called performance pieces or disruptions. Once you have marionettes, Becca read, you disarm people and attract children. Once you put on funny costumes with plumes or pointy-toed slippers, people can't help themselves. They grow enchanted. And so we tried to change the world through enchantment, one pair of eyes at a time, to bring a smile of the sort that said, ah yes, we foolish humans make one unholy mess after another. But I will try to remember to forgive myself and others and to give and receive pleasure in this short life. And that, as it happens, is my best advice to actors. Becca went to the window and peered down. 2 reporters she recognized vaguely sat on the stoop with a camera and Starbucks cups between them. They knew she would appear eventually to walk the dog. When you're a famous tour guide, even one who's lost all her tourists, everyone in the village knows your routines. Becca needed to get on with it. But first she slipped onto the Amalfi Coast just after the war with Camille and Otto and their troopers. One Saturday evening near the open-air market, we set up our stage. Well, we had no stage, but we had much colorful bunting that Otto and I had made from old linens we found in a second-hand shop. Otto had the idea to cut all the napkins in half on the diagonal and sew them onto bright grosgrain ribbons. They were lovely pale pastels with many shades of ivory and white. There was nothing in the piazza from which to hang them, so we enlisted some local children, and since we spoke little Italian, and none of them Polish or French or Yiddish or English, we placed our hands on their shoulders and moved them into a square and gestured until they understood that they were to be our proscenium arch and wings. We were flush with lira from tips the night before, so we paid them well. It was the end of the evening passeggiata, and the whole town seemed to gather round. Overlooking the calm sea, we performed our pantomimes as the sun went down, and we were, as they say, a smash hit. We stayed that night with a family that had befriended us. The kitchen had an ingenious system whereby one could wash the dishes and put them wet in the cupboard, and all the water would drain via a pipe to the sink. We talked that evening about getting a patent to bring the system to the States. We grew very excited and began to spend our fortune as we lay on the floor in this bare bedroom, not yet aware that electric dishwashers would soon become commonplace, or that all our other harebrained get-rich-quick schemes would likewise prove unworkable in this way or that. So we wrote a new amusement about a bunch of bumblers trying to get rich, and it grew to become The Schemers, still one of our best known. The cassette tape had long since clicked off. Becca tore herself away from Italy and back to the tenement where she'd been conceived, here near the end of Camille's life and well past the middle of her own. She put the book back on the shelf, smiling when she realized that Camille had hidden a whole second layer of books in the back. Becca hadn't created a theater troupe. She hadn't saved the village. She hadn't socked away savings for her old age or a down payment so that her son Aaron might one day come back to the city. "Oh, Camille," she whispered, "tell me how to have a happy life." Once, Becca had been the girl with wings. She had found a store in the flower district with a bin of peacock feathers on sale. She'd bought turquoise tulle in the garment district and strings of gold sequins in the trimming district and green glass beads in the bead district, and she had stretched a pair of periwinkle tights over coat hangers her father had curved into ovals for her. The makeup crew had sprinkled glitter in her hair, and she had flown in from the wing of the stage and sung a song written by Comden and Green. She sparkled on the stage, far enough away that no one could hurt her, and she could hurt no one, and she knew that was the real reason they called performers stars. Thank you.